You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 on Instagram and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold. Today we welcome in April Miller Boise, Chief Legal Officer, EVP Corporate Affairs, Policy, Integrity, Trade, and Legal at Intel Corporation. Intel is a global technology company with an iconic brand known for being one of the world's largest semiconductor companies and importantly, it's the only company that researches, designs, and manufacturing leading node semiconductors in America. April, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Benny. It's great to be here. That was a mouthful.
I'm sorry. A couple of those items you might have to explain to me, but I will say this: it's Chief Legal Officer at Intel. I mean, Intel, huge company. We all know what Intel is. We've seen it. Well, we'd like more of an explanation of what it is, but we've seen it everywhere. I mean, you have right. That's it. Thank you.
Intel inside. That's
incredible job. We're super stoked to have you on the Lawyer Stories podcast. So thank you so much for coming in.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. I love your podcast, and I love that you are telling all the stories of all these lawyers. You know, I would say I'm a lawyer's lawyer. I love being around lawyers and engaging with lawyers. And so I think these are some really interesting, fantastic stories. Thanks for telling them.
Thank you so much. I appreciate those kind words. So there's so much to unpack. I mean, I do some due diligence before the shows, and there's just things that I'm going to a dictionary and I'm looking things up. I'm okay, maybe we'll stay off that topic, but we'll go to this. But first, since it is Lawyer Stories, we do like the background of somebody. So tell us about growing up outside of Detroit and what that was like.
Yes, I love that you said outside of Detroit, because I love to say that I'm from Detroit.
Well, I was going to say Detroit, but pretty sure you said outside, so I was trying to...
No, you're right. I really am from the suburbs of Detroit. And I lived back there relatively recently as an adult, and there's a hat that says Detroit-ish.
Okay.
And so I love that hat. It's kind of
awesome.
I'm Detroit adjacent.
Yeah.
I would love to claim 8 Mile and M&M.
There you go.
But I grew up pretty close to there. Grew up in a town called Southfield. It's just right outside of Detroit. And lots of my friends were in and around Detroit. And it was really the heyday of Detroit. I want to say, Detroit is getting back to that heyday.
Yeah.
This is when, the automotive companies were everything around the globe. We really were a leader in lots of manufacturing. And I think Detroit is just an iconic town.
Yeah.
And, so much I think of who we are as a country is really around the brand of cars. And really everyone looked to us for that kind of style and that coolness, if you will, from the automotive industry. And I loved growing up, in and around the automotive.
So you're really proud, if somebody's hey, April, where you from?
Absolutely. And it really has defined so much of who I am, the automotive industry and Detroit. So I have such a strong affinity for Detroit.
And by the way, the Pistons don't look too bad this year.
I'm a big Celtics and the Lions are, they weren't bad.
The Lions, I don't know why I wouldn't say the Lions, but yes.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Yeah. I think it's always cool when somebody's really who's moved away or is doing something elsewhere is really proud of where they're from. I'm from Portland, Maine, and I'm very proud of that. I live in Central Mass, so that's really cool. So you never forget where you're from, Detroit, and the place. That's really cool. And
I have such a strong affinity for the Midwest. I spent a lot of my formative years, in and around the Midwest. So Ohio, Michigan.
Very good. So I saw somewhere on a video, and I just wanted to throw this in there since we're talking about growing up in the Detroit area. You had a maternal grandmother who had 6 siblings. Do you want to say anything about that?
I love that you saw that. That's the
Yeah.
Lewis girls. And so you
Yes.
probably saw the clip when I was talking about them for
Yep.
Black History Month. And I just gave a talk for Black History Month recently, and I
Nice.
was talking about them again. They were really impactful on who I am. So my grandmother grew up with her sisters. We call them the Lewis girls. And they were born in Columbus, Georgia.
Hmm.
But like many people, they grew up in the rural segregated South.
Wow.
And like many people, of that era, they left the South and they, that whole book, The Warmth of Other Suns, is about the great migration of African Americans from the South to the North, really looking for, less overt discrimination and more job opportunities. And so
Wow.
they landed in the Midwest, which is how I grew up in the Midwest.
Wow. Okay.
But really incredible, incredible women. They were fierce, they were independent, and they really gave me the belief when I was young that I could be and do anything I wanted to be. And they never like said that directly, but it was really just by their actions.
Okay.
They were like going to do anything that they wanted to do and be anything that they wanted to be. And so I really got that, fierceness and independent streak and just a will to make things happen from my grandmother. And I never really thought about that when I was younger.
Sure.
People just have this impact on who you become.
Right.
And she passed away when I was in high school, but
Okay.
many of her sisters lived quite a bit longer than that. They're all deceased now,
Uh-huh.
but they all had an incredible impact on me. Both her oldest sister and her youngest sister, I had very strong ties to. And so they were incredible.
Yeah, that's so important, and that's so fortunate to be able to be at an age where you can really understand, like your maternal grandmother and like sisters and things, and they had such an impact. That's really
Yeah,
great.
they really did. They were fierce.
I'm sure they were super proud of you.
Well, I appreciate that.
So you went to Michigan. So I've been to Ann Arbor once. I went for
You
Michigan.
said that as like someone who's not a
No,
Michigan fan.
I didn't mean to do that. I actually have a Michigan like sweatshirt. Like I visited Michigan once, like 15 like years ago. I went to the Ohio State, the Big House for a game.
Oh,
Ohio State versus Michigan. This was like when Michigan I think was a little better. But anyway, um, very good college. So are people when you're a high school student or looking for schools, Michigan's like the place to go, right? Like a lot of people want to go to University of Michigan.
yeah,
And what was
I
the
think
experience
that's
like?
right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big state, and there are a lot of universities and colleges in Michigan, but I would say from a state perspective, it's definitely number one. It's such a highly regarded public institution. I think it's, number three in the country for public schools and highly rated even against private schools as well. And so I actually really, I didn't apply to that many colleges. I really wanted to go to Harvard.
Okay.
I did very well in high school. I did not get into Harvard. I got waitlisted. And then I went, and Michigan was right there. And Michigan is an incredible
Incredible.
institution.
Yeah.
And I visited Michigan and I loved it. And
Yep.
it was the right choice for me. I had it was such a formative um, time and experience for me. I ended up going to the business school undergrad. And so it's one of the only colleges in the country, and certainly then was one of the only colleges that had an undergraduate business track and an undergraduate business career degree. And so I went to what's now kind of the Ross School of Business. So I love when I meet people, they're like, "You went to Ross?" I'm like, "No, no, it wasn't called Ross when I was there, right?
Yep.
They have since renamed it, all those naming rights, but it was I got a fantastic education
That's yeah, that's
and met
amazing.
some of my best, lifelong friends at the University of Michigan.
That's great. Yeah, go blue. I'm a Michigan fan. I love
Go
it. I don't know
blue.
why I came across that way when I was like when I was
I'll
introducing
take it.
Michigan.
That's okay. That's
I don't know
okay.
why.
I'm glad you
So
rebounded.
so you had some internships that were like pretty interesting. Automotive industry, and obviously going back to like your roots in Detroitish,
Yeah.
Detroit area. Saturn and then General Motors. What do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, and this is probably why it's so important that I ended up at Michigan because it really has shaped who I am. And so, again, growing up in Detroit, the automotive companies were really big, and that was a really big part of the economy there. And every summer, they would have pretty large internship classes. And so I was fortunate enough, it was probably my right before I started business school. I got an internship with Saturn, and this is when Saturn was a brand new like baby company. and we had 90 interns in our summer class. And I will never forget. And so I interned at Saturn 2 summers in HR and then in finance. And then I ended up going to Honeywell for another summer
Okay.
in finance. So I was in the business school, I was an accounting and finance major. But what was really important about that first summer is number one, I was meeting all these other students, highly motivated students from around the country because they would hire from all kinds of schools, every school, very competitive. General Motors executives would come and speak to us at least once a week and do a presentation about
Wow.
what was going on with the business. So you can imagine, like, we learned so much about the company, but then it felt like every week, maybe it wasn't that often. I probably was there, I don't know, 12 weeks. We would go and we would do a tour of a manufacturing site.
Wow.
So we went into all these different manufacturing sites and saw all different parts of how cars were made. And that for me was transformational. I was like, wow, I had
Really?
never seen anything like that. And just to go through these plants and to see all the machinery and the advanced technology, whether they were making spark plugs or engines or, glass for cars or whatever, it was really incredibly informative, and it made me really have a love for manufacturing. It was fantastic.
So what piqued your interest the most about that? Like, were you looking at things from like I don't know, like what point of view were you looking at that from? Like the
I think
building point of view, like maybe like you all of a sudden had like a liability point of like, or how are you looking at that?
I think so. I wasn't an engineer, right? I didn't
Right.
like grow up as a maker. And I think we go through life at a young age where you take a lot of things for granted and you don't really necessarily think about how are things made. And so to see, to walk through the plants and seeing all of these big machines that
Right.
were, forming metal into other things that were then going into a bigger system and a bigger system, and to see things going down the assembly line,
Mm.
it was just incredible to me. I can't even explain it. I was blown away. The other thing I really learned at Saturn is, again, it was a new baby company then,
Yep.
and it was kind of this brainchild of an executive from General Motors. They wanted to start a new company that was different. It was a very open environment. So this is, we had cubicles and all the executives had glass offices. You could see them. Most of them did not have doors, so they were very accessible. That was a very different concept then because executives were on a really high floor. Usually they had panel offices. You couldn't
Right.
get to the executive floor. And my office was at my office. My cubicle was very close to the CEO. His name was Skip. And I remember him one day I got on the elevator with him and, he could tell I was an intern. And he was like, what are you working on? Like, I hope we're giving you interesting work. And a big part of what they were focused on for the summer was really getting kids interested in manufacturing and automotive by giving them real work. So we weren't just
Okay.
like making copies or just kind of hanging out and going to meetings and listening. They were trying to give us real work so that we could really learn what it
Okay.
was to work there. It
What
was
kind of real work can you give
incredible.
somebody at a manufacturing place?
I mean, not very much, but I remember one of the
Yeah.
projects. Well, I mean, it was manufacturing, but the interns were in all different areas. So
Okay.
almost all the interns were in we were all in corporate
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I remember one of the projects that I did was a marketing project. They were looking at where they would locate their dealerships. So we
Oh,
were doing
cool.
this research on MSAs. I didn't even know what an MSA was
Okay.
then. It was kind of like, where is the population centers? What's our demographic for this new, Saturn vehicle that's kind of small and hip, very different than the cars GM was making? Well, where are those people? Who would buy our cars? And where should we put the dealership based on where they live or shop
Yeah.
or, traffic patterns? So, and this is well before the internet. So the way you would research, you get all these marketing reports. It was really
Oh,
interesting.
wow. Yeah. No, that especially before the internet.
Yeah, and I still remember this. And this is like, I hate to say, like 35 years ago at this point.
So it's not that long ago. It doesn't seem like that long ago.
Well,
Believe me, it doesn't. I saw like a meme or somebody posting on Facebook that they said like change this thing in your house. It's 35 years ago, and then they were like, wow, and then they realized it was like 90 something, and they were like,
yes.
Oh my gosh, how's that possible?
You're
All
like,
right,
how is that
so
possible? That's right.
I know it's crazy. So I like to ask this question to my guests. Like, when did you know you wanted to be a lawyer? Like, did you have a moment in time? Did you just like, was it always that way? Like,
Yeah.
tell us when you knew.
Really good question. I did not grow up around any lawyers, and the
Okay,
only lawyers I knew like were on television, right? That was kind of
right.
what we thought lawyers did was based on what we saw on television. And so when I was in the business school in undergrad, I had a course on real estate law. And there was a woman professor who was visiting, and I think she actually was visiting from the University of Chicago, but she was
Wow.
teaching this real estate course using a casebook, like a legal casebook.
Yeah.
And it was just really foreign to me. And I thought it was so incredibly
Oh, I loved them.
interesting. And
Yeah.
I would talk to her. I was that kid who I went to office hours all the time. I went to every professor, TA
Good.
office hours. So I would go and talk to her all the
And that
time.
was Michigan. This was
And
at,
that was at Michigan.
yeah.
And she was
Okay.
like, you should think about law school.
Yeah.
And so then I really started thinking about it.
I have to ask because part of my story is that before I went to law school, I ordered books like a contract and a torts book
Oh my gosh.
off of eBay because
Right.
it
Not
was
even
like
Amazon. I can't believe there was eBay.
eBay because I was so interested in just like reading cases. So like I have to ask you, like you've read all these things, you were reading like Saturn manuals and like you were doing all this stuff. Like what was it about the case book where you were like, wow, this is super cool and you were like
Yeah.
going to your because I remember having exchanges to like with professors, like I mean, I'm just curious, like what was it about the property book that lit you sort of like on fire? Like
I
you're
think it was different because it wasn't property. It was really more real estate. And so it was about, it might have been like
real
real
estate.
estate
Okay.
transactions. And so
Gotcha.
I've always, I was in the business school. I've always been like a transactional person. And so she was teaching this kind of, extracurricular course that business students could take because maybe you'd go be a real estate investor or do real estate transactions. And so I really just like the subject matter of learning about real estate transactions.
Okay.
Maybe if it had been property, I probably would not have been as
Not property.
gone to
Okay.
law
So there
school.
is like the difference, which that's how
Yeah.
long it's been for me. Okay.
Yeah, well, it was
Real-
definitely more business focused, not just property.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry. Not property. It wasn't the Dukeheimer or whatever book I had back in there. I think it was
Exactly.
called. Okay, so tell us about making your transition to law school from the Ford Motor Company. You're in a like a glass plant or a glass office,
Yeah, it's glass plant, glass plant.
glass
So
plant, and then you made a transition. Tell us.
when I graduated from undergrad, I spent a little time abroad. I went and I worked in Paris for a little while, which was amazing. But then I went to work at a glass plant for Ford Motor Company in Nashville, Tennessee. And I said I love manufacturing, so I really wanted to work at a facility and just get that experience. And so I ended up going to Nashville, where my father was from. So never thought I would move to Nashville, but I was like, I mean, okay, I know people there. I had
Yeah.
spent many, many summers there as a kid. And so I loved it because, again, now I was like full time working at a manufacturing facility. And it was interesting to work in the glass division because, glass starts from sand and all these other, raw material inputs. And at the
Wow.
end of the, building, glass comes out. And the furnaces are run 247, 365. And so you have three shifts. Somebody's always there working, running the glass furnaces. And just a really different product than, other manufacturing processes. So I got to kind of see the process and how glass is made. In some ways, then it was still pretty manual. I mean, there were lots of machines, but there was a lot of, I remember like shoveling raw materials and aggregates and putting them back into the furnace. I learned a lot about quality control. At some point, we were having a lot of quality issues
Interesting.
with just little bubbles, and you can imagine people don't really want bubbles in their glass on their windshields or their
Right.
what we called side lights. And so, really getting ahead of the quality issues, they'd have to like pull them aside and then figure out what was the quality issue. So it was a great experience, and I was like the youngest person at the plant, and it was a very old facility. And
Wow.
so, there were people who had been at the plant for 35 years. And here I come, so, they're 65 years old. And here I come, I was probably like 21. and just like a young whippersnapper, I'm sure
Yeah.
is what they would say in Nashville. So it was great,
That wow. And then
really
you
interesting.
then so like how did you decide after that year to go to law school? You were just like,
Well,
okay.
when I went there, I knew that I was going to law school.
Okay.
Like, I kind of wanted a little bit of time. I went and did that work abroad program in
Mhm.
France because I never got to do that when I was in undergrad. I was a very serious student, as I said. Like, I went to the office hours
Yeah.
all the time. I was always very focused in school, and I needed a little bit of a break. So I did that summer abroad in Paris, and then I went to Ford. And then, at some point I was like, okay, like I'm going back to law school. I'm ready to go. And I didn't know if I would take a year off or 2 years off, but I had already applied when I went to Ford Motor Company.
Okay. All right. So and that's cool that they like kind of took you in like for a year, like doing the work because a lot of people they know you're going to law school, they're like, what do we want to hire you for a year, you know? I mean, just
Yeah,
like sometimes that's like how
I
they
agree.
work, you know. So that's awesome. You got that experience and then so tell us what you went to University of Chicago.
I
Amazing
did. I
place.
went.
What was your law school experience like? Were you at office hours every day again, or how did that
Well,
go?
first of all, people call Chicago the place where fun goes to die. The University of Chicago is the place where fun goes to die.
Oh no, do they have that on a T-shirt too?
Well,
That's
it's
awful.
definitely true if you go there undergrad. Law
Okay.
school's a little bit better, but it's very cerebral. It's a very serious
Wow.
place.
Okay.
I still had a lot of fun, but I picked it because it's very different than Michigan. Michigan is a very big school. It's very liberal. It's very rah-rah. And I loved that. And
Yep.
I just wanted to do something different. And
Okay.
so I went to Chicago. I visited. I actually thought I would go to school in New York. I thought I was going to go to Columbia. I'd
Okay.
never been to New York at that point. And my mentor was like, I don't see you going to Columbia. You are not a big city person. Like you haven't even been there. So I
Yeah.
ended up going to Chicago. Still very urban, which I loved. It was a very small school, which I loved. Barack Obama was there when I was
Oh, no
there,
kidding. That's
but I
amazing.
never took any of his classes. So I have a funny
Oh, he
story.
was teaching there.
He was teaching there. I
What did
met
he
him.
teach at law school?
Well, so, I'm a business major. I'm like a business track person. I'm like
Yeah.
very serious. He was teaching like, this is not what he was teaching, but it was something like love and the law.
Loving the
Or
law.
like, it wasn't love and the law, but it was something that was not on the corporate
You could
tracks.
have taken like one class, like April. I think it would have been all right if you took like one class. That
Benny, I'm telling you so much about myself. Like I was very serious and
okay.
focused, but I met Obama when he was first running.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
As a senator. And I jokingly said, like, oh, hey, I was at Chicago, when you were there. And, he was like, well, why didn't you take my class? I'm like, I did take your class.
That's what he
He's
said.
like, no, you didn't. I would have known had you taken my class because it was a
Okay.
very small class, like 10 people per
Oh,
class.
all right. All right.
So, no, I was very focused on, corporate tax, venture capital, so all the things that would lead you to be an M&A lawyer on Wall
You were
Street.
like, you
I was
really think
very
Obama,
focused.
I'm going to take love and the law? Come on, man.
Yeah. I don't remember what he taught, but
But
to me it
so
was
you,
kind
so
of
you,
like love of the law.
where did you meet? You met him at school at some point?
I never really knew him when I was at Chicago. He was there. I
Okay.
mean, it was kind of like he was youngish, but it's kind of like if you're a
Yeah.
student and you have all your professors and you're focused and you're studying, you really don't know very well the professors that you don't have. And
Right,
so
right,
he was
right.
just this person who, had this class,
Okay.
with a funny name. So
But where did you, I'm sorry, where did you end up meeting him eventually?
Oh, I met him in Ohio actually when he was
Okay. All
first
right.
running for president after
I
he
think
was
I think
senator.
that's funny that the first question he asked you is, "Oh, why did you take my class?" Out of
Because
anything
I
he
was
could have asked you, like, "Oh, how did you like it? Like, did you get a good education? Like, what are you doing now?" His first question
well,
is, "Did you take
I
my
think what
class?"
he was saying too is like Chicago's a very small school and
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
very small population of African American students. So I'm sure he was thinking like, how did I not know you when you were there?
yeah.
But I was in a different orbit. I
Like, how did he say that? Did he say
doing
it with like a
M&A.
twinkle in his eyes a little
I
bit?
mean, he
No,
sounded
I'm
very,
just
he
kidding.
was very nice.
I
He
know.
was just like,
Yeah,
why
no,
didn't you take
it's
my class? How did I not know you?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I bet. Yeah, he seems like a nice guy.
Yeah. No, but Chicago
That's
was
fun.
great, despite being the
Yeah.
place where fun goes to die, or at least known as that. Fun does not die there. I enjoyed it. I met a lot of, people that I'm still very good friends with. And so it was a great experience for me. And it was very, very different than Michigan. It is definitely like a law and econ
Yeah.
That's its reputation, and that's really what they focus on, which is great for an M&A lawyer because I took a ton of classes, again, that would lead you to, have a practice that's very business focused.
So I mean, yeah, all right, that's great. And then we took another turn. You ended up somehow in Wall Street, right? You
I
did you go to,
did.
was that New York? I was going to say, look, you said you had never been to New York at one point. I was
Yes,
like,
it
hey, come to
was.
our event May 1st. But
Ex-
that's
Exactly.
that's incredible. So how you ended
No,
out on Wall Street?
so I didn't go straight to Wall Street.
Okay.
I actually took another turn. I ended up going to practice initially in Missouri. And I
Really?
think after being there for a couple of years, I was just kind of like, this is not really, I need to be in a bigger market. And so it was at a time where, M&A was booming, corporate was booming, Wall Street was booming. And so I had thought about going back to Chicago because I knew I wanted to be in a bigger market. And we had tons of law school friends in Chicago, but I also had a ton of friends in New York. And so I called them and like, hey, what's it like? How's it going? And they were like, it's great. We're very busy. So many law firms are hiring and looking for, corporate lateral associates. And so I ended up going to New York. I had kind of done the same kind of law in Missouri. I was in Kansas City that I was doing in New York. So I did IPOs and mergers and acquisitions and
Oh,
venture capital work. And so I was definitely in demand. Like they were looking for,
wow.
bodies that know how to do corporate law. And so I had a number of offers when I went to New York, and I ended up going to a firm called Cleary Gottlieb, which I loved because Cleary was very much of a kind of white shoe, but corporate law firm. And all of the corporate team was kind of in one group. So you did everything in corporate. I did private equity and I did, securities. I did IPOs. I did debt work. I did sovereign work. And I worked really closely with a lot of the partners there. And it really it was grueling. I worked, around the clock all the time, but I learned so much. I mean, that's how
Wow.
you learn is by doing. So it
Did
was
you
a
like New
great.
York, April?
I did actually. I
Yeah.
love New York. I think it takes a little while to get used to it and feel integrated,
Yeah.
but once I did, I loved it. And I liked where Cleary was located. So I lived in Brooklyn Heights, and then
Okay.
Cleary was right downtown, right across from the World Trade Centers, actually.
Yeah.
But it was just one subway stop from Brooklyn Heights
Not
to,
bad.
One Liberty Plaza, and they're still down there.
Wow. Okay. That's where are you barred, by the way?
Too many states. So
Okay. All right.
I
So
took the
it's
bar in Missouri, Kansas, New
okay.
York, and Ohio. So now I'm still
Okay.
active in New York and Ohio.
Okay. Wow. All right. Wow. So much. So tell me about like any. I think this is a good point to ask this question. Tell me about any mentors you had along the way, or like any like inspirational figures, or somebody who's
Yeah.
helping you along the way.
I would say I didn't have as many as I would have liked in hindsight. And so I try to always remember that and be a really good mentor and sponsor to others. But I did have a couple, and they were incredibly important. So one was the woman that I mentioned. Her name was
Mhm.
Kay Stanfield Brown, and her husband was actually a counselor at the University of Michigan.
Okay.
And, he didn't have a lot of students that, had gone on to law school that were African American women. And his wife was one, and she had gone to Michigan. So he was like, I want you to meet my wife. I think she'll be such a great advisor for you. And they lived in Southfield, Michigan, which is where I lived.
Wow.
And so that
Okay.
was great. She was the one when I was looking at law schools was like, no, I really think you should go to Chicago. It's a wonderful school. It's in the Midwest. It's going to be a little bit more manageable in terms of the size of the school and the size of the city. So I went to visit, and I loved Chicago when I went to go visit. So she was incredible just in like giving me that direction, and she had her own small practice, and so I would like, go to her office and sit at her desk and, pick up the phone, and she would
Yeah.
take pictures of me like, "Hey, I'm a lawyer." So she was incredible. And then much later, I had I would say people who were sponsors. So one of them was a guy named Craig Martahouse, and anybody who knows my story has heard me talk about Craig. He was a partner when I moved from New York back to Cleveland. So when I went back to Cleveland to a law firm, I was highly recruited to go to this firm because they were like, "Oh, we've got this lawyer. She's got all this Wall Street training. We want corporate lawyers." But as soon as I got to the firm, like they were like, "Okay, great." But everybody was already staffed on deals. And so I didn't have any work to do. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do now
Oh
to
wow.
here? my office just happened to be close to his. And so we would strike up a conversation, and he was a very senior partner and he had lots of
Okay.
work and lots of matters, but it
Wow.
wasn't really kind of the traditional M&A work that I did. But he would say like, "Hey, I have this little project. Would you work on it for me? Would you like take care of this?" And I'd be like, "Sure. I mean, what else am I doing?" So just little by little, I would do his projects and he'd be like, "Well, that was a great job. Thank you. Like, let me give you another one." And we just became friends and I did work for him. And again, he was on the executive committee at the firm. He just was a very important partner and he had power that he was willing to use for my benefit. And that's kind of what I think about like a sponsor is somebody who can speak your name in rooms when you're not there, right?
Wow.
He was like, she's incredible. She does incredible work. She has incredible EQ. Clients really like her. She can run major deals by herself. So he was really my sponsor when I became a partner. And then he was really the person who said to me, you should be the next managing partner of this office. And I was like that was never something that was
Wow.
even in my sights. And he really pushed me to think bigger about what I could do. So he was an incredible, incredible sponsor. And I'm still very good friends with him.
Really? Okay. That's
Yeah.
wow, that's amazing. So important. So you worked in private practice for like 15 years, and then you switched to a general counsel role in manufacturing.
Yeah.
Am I skipping too far ahead from where we
No,
were? Okay, I just
not at all.
April, there's so much that I like. I'm trying to work my way to Intel, which I'm getting to
No,
very soon. But I
not at all.
want,
I can tell you, I can bridge that and tell you how that happened. And
yeah,
so one of the ways that I really kind of built my reputation at the law firm is that I was an M&A partner and I did a lot of M&A work for a lot of kind of our industrial
yep,
manufacturing companies. But one company in particular was Goodyear. And there was actually a
okay,
guy there who was the senior vice president of mergers and acquisitions. His name was Clark Sprang. And he was much older than I was. But that's a long story that we won't go into. But I basically started up a relationship with him that was really based on not me doing legal work for him. He was just visiting our office, and I was kind of responsible for babysitting him, if you will. They were using our conference rooms for a meeting, and they were like, "We need somebody to watch." Again, this is when I was new. I didn't have any work to do.
yep,
He ended up becoming my number one client when I was at.
wow.
So I built a really strong relationship with Goodyear. Clark Sprang was an incredible client, and just really good friend. And so I did deal after deal after deal after deal for them. And that built my reputation to do M&A work with other clients because they were
What
such a big client, such a big company.
what kind of deals? When you say deals, like
So it was a time when Goodyear was really distressed. And so they were
Okay,
looking at lots of ways to pivot their business
okay,
and build up their balance sheet.
gotcha.
So they were looking at, they had a lot of Goodyear stores. They were looking at what could we do with our stores? Should they be in a joint venture? Should we be thinking about,
Okay,
monetizing them in different ways? Should we change our business strategy? So I did that. And then they sold a number of non-core divisions that were
okay,
not tire manufacturing. And so I really helped them package those businesses and carve those businesses out so they can improve their balance sheet. And then ultimately, we sold one of their biggest divisions to a private equity company. And then Clark retired. He left Goodyear. The company spun off. But then a couple years later, they had a big change in their management team, a
okay.
shakeup, the spin out. And they were looking for a new CLO. And they came and asked me to talk to them about being their CLO. And it
Wow.
was great because I knew a lot of the leadership teams. Some of them were gone, but some of them were still there. It was local and I knew the business. So it was a relatively low risk.
Okay.
I was very senior at the firm. Like I said, I was in law firm management. I was on the
Great.
executive committee. I had been the office partner in charge of the office, the managing partner of the office. And so it was kind of like, are you really going to leave law practice now? Like you've done it for so long, you're
Right.
moving up to senior leadership. But I really wanted to get back to being closer to the business.
So
Um,
what would you advise somebody who's looking to make that transition from, being at a law firm to going in-house?
um, I think number one, you need to really understand the job is very different and, try to get as close to your in-house clients as you can to understand the difference in your role
Okay.
and think about whether it is something that you're really interested in doing, I think it moves at a much faster pace.
Okay.
And you are called upon to do work that's much broader. People
Right.
at law firms have deep, deep, deep expertise, and you're called upon for that niche expertise. When you're in-house, you are called upon, like people walk into your office every day and they want you to know an answer to anything that's legal related because they're like,
Anything.
hey, you're my lawyer.
Anything.
And
Yep.
so you just got to be comfortable with that change.
And so that would be leadership. And I guess my next question about leadership, being like a leader at, at this company, like what advice do you have for any leader at an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think our teams and our people really look up to us for the vision and the direction of the organization. And so I really try to think about number one, being a servant leader and really like, I know that's kind of a cliche term, but really saying like, I'm here for the benefit of my people and my team. I think we need to listen more than we talk. We need
Okay.
to really understand our employees and what's going on around the business and to hear from them. We need to be very customer centric and really understanding like why are we winning with our customers? Why do we have a right to win? What do our customers really want from us? And how do we help our customers succeed? I think those are really important. And then I think, of course, as lawyers, especially, we need to really understand the business. I think sometimes people are so focused on being really good at what they do and their function, but we can be so much better as advisors where we really, really understand the business. So getting to really know your business colleagues, the engineering team, the people that are doing R&D, the people that are, what we would call our fabs, our factories, you have to really get to know those people
Yeah.
to really understand the business to deliver the best advice, I think is
Interesting.
really important.
Interesting. Okay. So, and I don't mean to like skip so ahead or like trying to bridge like I want to talk a little bit about like Intel and your role there and like the issues that you're taking on there that you see at such a
Yeah.
big place. So what can you tell us?
It's a fascinating company. I think, it's an iconic brand for a reason. We've been around for 50 years and we really like to say we put the silicon in Silicon Valley because Silicon Valley really did start because of semiconductors and because of Intel. And so we're going through a major transformation right now. I know that, I'm sure like other people, you see all the news, we're in the news all the time because people love to read about us. And the reason I came to Intel is I think it's such a consequential company. I
Okay.
think it's really important for the US and for the globe. The technology that we create and that we implement in all types of systems is mission critical for really everything we do. From our cars to our defense systems, and everything in between. Semiconductors really drive that. And, this is a digital and a technological age, and no one does what we do. So we're going through this huge transformation, and we've got to get that right because we're such an important and consequential company. And that's really what made me come here is I love turnarounds and transformation. I love like rolling up my sleeves and doing that hard work. And just working with really smart people. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, but we've done a lot of that heavy lifting already.
Yep.
And so it's kind of fun to have that challenge all the time. Every day I would say the whole world is watching us. And I love having people on my team who are like, we are ready for that challenge, let's go.
Tell us about your team. Like, is it a big legal team there? And like, or you have like a million lawyers working for you? And like, what are some of the
Yeah,
issues that get like escalated to you?
I would say my team is incredible. And that was one of the things, and I inherited them. It was one of the things that jumped out at me or struck me when I first got to Intel is we have very, very deep talent and a deep bench, really
Wow.
smart people
Yeah.
who are very committed. And so my team is pretty big and it's not just legal. And now my team, I have more people who are not lawyers than are lawyers, but I still have a big legal team. So I have government affairs, I have
Okay.
international trade, I have what we call integrity, which includes corporate security and compliance and ethics, and then of course a whole bunch of legal teams that does all kinds of things under the sun, from M&A to corporate governance, supports the board, litigation. But it's a really, really
Wow.
strong team, and I think my leadership team, put us up against anyone. They really are seen as leaders across the organization, and we're very embedded with the business because I think the business really sees the value that our lawyers, bring every day because they really understand the business and can give advice based on that business understanding.
Like, what's a day? And you said trade, and I'm just like, oh boy. But what's your like day? What I bet a lot of people would be really curious to know what is a day like for you? Like, as a C-suite executive, like this enormous
Yeah.
company, like everybody knows about, everybody's seen, everybody's heard the jingle.
Bum, 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 bum. Every day is different. Especially when you're going through a transformation, because you have a lot of noise that's coming from the outside. So you're very kind of focused on the transformation. But every day, things are being thrown at you, whether it's, new regulations, new administration,
Right.
new challenges with, competition. Everybody, of course, wants to um, you know, knock us off our throne, if you will. And we have to really stay focused on serving our customers and really understanding what our customers want. So we like to say everybody has to be in the arena, right? You have to be in it. You have to be in the game. You can't be sitting on the sidelines just coaching others. So I like to think of it as everybody's got to be a player coach, right? You have to play
Right.
and you have to coach your team. And it's busy every day, but again, every day is different. It's very dynamic, which is
Yeah.
again keeps us fun and keeps us on our toes.
Yeah, and I think you've had some good LinkedIn posts. I saw your LinkedIn. You probably saw today that I looked at it like 5 or 6 times. No, I'm just kidding. Well, maybe not. But you have a new CEO. Is that
We
like
do. We
that
just
started?
announced yesterday.
Okay,
Yeah.
congratulations. Yeah. How so? I don't know if like you want to, you don't have to comment on
No,
it.
I can't.
Congratulations to your new CEO.
No, we're very excited.
Okay.
I think anytime a company is without a CEO, there's lots of speculation about what's happening. What does
Yeah.
that mean for this company? Why is it taking them so long? So, of course, the board wants to be very thoughtful and thorough in, finding the right person to lead the organization. And so we have a new CEO, Lip Bhutan, who was on the board for a
Okay.
couple of years, and he joined the board right after I got to Intel. And so I had the benefit of onboarding him for his board because that's a part of what my team does is we, manage our board relationships and do all the governance. And so I really got to know him through my work with him on the board. I think he's an incredible leader. He's highly regarded in the ecosystem and in the technology
Okay.
space. And we're really excited about having him on board and helping us execute kind of the next version or the next leg of our strategy.
So how do you like get on a board like Intel? Like how many people do you have on there? And like, I'm assuming it's a little more difficult than getting on a housing authority board, which I handle. So
There you go.
I'm just kind of curious.
You have to, we look for a really broad and diverse set of experiences and
Okay.
background on the board. Certainly, industry experience is
Yeah.
really important because our industry is very complex and very complicated.
Totally.
And we have continued to add, just in the last couple of years, even more directors that have deep industry experience and ecosystem, experience in our ecosystem because as we go through this transformation, we need, that really strong expertise in counsel and advice. And so we're really excited about having Litbu back, but we have a great board as well.
Do you feel everything you did like back and forward and like Detroit-ish and like do you think that all like led to today, like what you're doing, like being able to like roll up your sleeves and like deal
Yeah.
with issues and be a leader and like just sort of dig? Does that
I do. And it's interesting to look at it in hindsight because when it all looks like, oh, it's all perfectly woven together and it absolutely makes sense. But of course, you don't know that when you're going through it. And so, this is what I tell my kids and I tell anyone that I'm mentoring is like, your job in life as you work through, your education and your career is really to just learn as much as you can and stack those experiences together because the more you learn, you take that with you wherever you go, and it's going to help inform what you want to do next and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And we're always learning, right? And so,
yeah.
again, in hindsight, it feels like, oh, this has prepared you perfectly. But, I ended up here because of my experiences. If I had had different experiences, hopefully as strong and as deep, I would have ended up somewhere else instead. And so I think it's important to really like what you do and enjoy what you do.
Totally.
And so think about that as you're going through your career and your education of like building those experiences. And you're like, oh, I loved this. Me, manufacturing, I love this. Maybe this you didn't like as much. So pivot and go learn something else.
Right, right. No, that makes perfect sense. So talking about LinkedIn, just going back to that, you have some great posts. But I think 5 days ago, you had a photo with like the women working at Intel.
Ah,
And there's like all these like different like photos, and you took the time to sort of get corral everybody from their busy day, I'm guessing, and
yes.
take a photo and like recognize the importance of International Women's Day. Like, what does that mean to you as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to acknowledge the work that our team does. And again, we have this big, broad global team from around the world, and they all have different lived experiences. And so I want to make sure that we are all together acknowledging this team of people that we have, and we stop and we celebrate each other regularly. So we had, this year, International Women's Day and Employee Appreciation Day were like back to back. So we did
Yeah.
different events for both of those occasions, but it really is kind of stopping to take the time to say to our teams and our employees, like, we really appreciate you. This is what drives our company. You are everything that makes up our company. Without our employees and that skill set and that knowledge base, we wouldn't be anything. And so just making sure, and it's when you're going through a transformation, it's stressful, it's
Yeah.
challenging, and our employees are coming every day and, fighting the fight. And so we want to just make sure that they know that we understand that, we see that, we love them, we acknowledge the hard work that they're doing, and we want to just make sure that people feel appreciated. So that was fun. We had some teams calls, and we got a bunch of people,
That's awesome.
our women employees and all of our allies, just got on a Teams call and took some screenshots, and we said like, hey, we're having a photo up for International Women's Day. But it was fun. You could see all the smiles and people were laughing. And,
Oh, that's great.
we try to, again, I like to say work hard, play hard. We try
Yeah,
to have a lot of fun because we're
you
doing
have
all
to.
the work.
You have to, for
Yeah,
sure. So speaking of going back to the board of directors, you're a member of the board of directors for Train Technologies.
I
Do you want to
am.
tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Train Technologies is based in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's really born out of a spinoff from Ingersoll Rand and the
Okay.
Train brand of that. So it's a climate pure play business, which means they make systems that help companies control the climate. And so from a data center to your house to office buildings, and we want to do that in a sustainable way. So they're very focused on research and development and how we can continue to improve the efficiency of all of these building systems that, heat and cool and control the temperature and the air quality in our buildings. And I've been at the board just a little over 3 years. So I joined, right before I joined Intel. And it's an incredible company. I mean,
Yeah.
they're growing. Their growth story is really amazing. And it's really because I think of their sustainability focus and their focus on innovation and really being forward looking on how we can improve the efficiency of those systems. And I think they're just out competing and they're winning in the market. But incredible. Dave DeGeneres is our CEO, and he's done a really great job.
Wow. Wow. So you're passionate, I read that you're passionate about helping advance the careers of the next generation of executives. So how can Lawyer Stories assist with that? How can we help you get your word out or help you, do whatever we need to do to just, work together or like stay connected and that sort of thing?
I think you're doing it, Benny. I think like telling all these stories or of all these different lawyers, and having people just kind of appreciate the diversity of those journeys. Everybody feels like there's this one path to be, successful as a
Yeah.
lawyer, whatever that means. But there's so many different ways to go about it. And so I think you telling these stories, people can identify with these stories and say to themselves, like, hey, I can do this too. And I think that's so much of it is telling the story of all of
Yeah.
these lawyers and helping people understand how can you navigate the space that you're in to be successful and to define that success for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So, was there anything that I left out about Intel? Like, do you want to give us anything else about what you're doing, or anything that's coming out, like that's being like invented? Like, I don't know. I'm
No,
not a
I
super
mean,
technological person, but
I mean, I think it's an incredible company. We are going through a significant transformation. And I
yeah,
guess what I would leave the audience with that sometimes people don't really understand. People hear about all these different semiconductor companies. You know, Intel is the only company in the world that does research and development, design and manufacturing, logic chips. So those are the chips that are the brains behind your systems, logic chips at leading nodes. And we're continuing to do that advanced research and advanced manufacturing. We're the only company that does that. So there are companies that design semiconductors, but then they don't make them. And then there are companies that make semiconductors for other people, but they're not designing them for themselves. And so it's an incredibly capital intensive business.
wow,
And so it's very challenging. If it were easy, lots of other people would be doing it and no
yeah.
one else is doing it. And so we have to win. And we're very focused on winning. And a lot of that is transforming our business so that we will be around for another 50 years. And we're
Wow.
well on the way.
Well, they're very lucky to have you, and congratulations on your role. You've been there a couple years now, I think.
Yeah, almost
Um,
three.
Almost three. So that's fantastic, April. Congrats on all your success. And is there anything else, or did you?
No, Benny,
Okay,
thank you
good.
so much. I appreciate this. Again, I love that you're having these conversations. I had a good time listening to some of the back episodes. So thank you for having me on.
Good.
I appreciate you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, April Miller Boise, Chief Legal Officer at Intel. Please stay right there, April, and everybody else. Thanks for tuning in, wherever you are in the world today. Enjoy yourselves.
Bum, 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 bum.